speeds because you superconduct the wires. And there's a few people like Microsoft who are very advanced in this. Weirdly, some people you'd think would work on it aren't working on it. And then there's quantum. And quantum is, I spend a lot of time studying quantum because it's interesting mathematics. Both can we build a quantum computer, when can we build a quantum computer? Quantum computer is not interesting till you have at least 10,000 qubits. Then it's interesting. For a certain class of problems, how big is that class of problems? Weirdly, prime number factorization is, because of Shor's theorem, in that set of things. So you can issue yourself as many bitcoins as you want, among other things that can happen. So quantum, even though Microsoft is putting billions in, and it's very promising, predicting that is not clear. Predicting cloud computing and continued cloud scale out, including taking the FPGA and GPU pieces and integrating those in a much deeper way. I mean, GPUs are very expensive today, and they don't inherently have to be for the dominant ML training and inference things that we do. So there's a generation that will come there that, certainly another factor of 10.
Thank you.
Hi, Jay.
Hi, yeah, Jay. I'm a little hesitant to reveal that I'm on faculty at Stanford.
Great.
But I teach computer science there, and I'm a big believer that there's a huge opportunity for society around learning computer science skills. There's this big need. And then the other trend that we've been talking about among some of my colleagues is just the pressure for, with awesome tools like Khan Academy and all the online learning that's available, the pressure that's coming on the traditional residential university model. What do you think is the right way to usher in kind of the evolution where residential education, the thought leadership universities shrink, and maybe there's less residential education opportunities at the university level for students? What's the right role for those thought leading universities to play?
Well, there's no doubt that Stanford's not under pressure. That is the philanthropy and science grants that are available to it. There is a question, should it try and grow its student body because it's such a wonderful thing for the world to have more students go there. The key schools that really are at risk are the state level schools, where the vast majority of college education in this country is done by four-year state schools. And that's where you still have tuitions that are like $11,000 to $17,000 per year, as opposed to, say, $60,000 per year. Now, that 60 has immense scholarship pieces in it. So if Stanford wants you, that you are not economically blocked from going there, which is fantastic. There's about 5 institutions that can afford to do that. So if you're in the top, 0.1% on merit, and you can make them figure that out, then that works out very well. These state-level institutions are raising tuition because they haven't raised the productivity that much. I do believe that a mix of using more online, sharing more material, can still give us this whole tiering where you have Stanford and Harvard still there, also contributing some of the material that gets used by those other tiers. The other tiers today don't like just taking a course from somebody else. And the number of students who can learn without a social setting around it is very, very small. If you want to learn computer science, just, Knuth wrote the book. Buy it, okay. Read it and do the problems if you really think you know this thing. If you want to learn physics, Feynman wrote the book. Just read the damn book. It's all there. So that when we put stuff online, we don't have anything in online physics that's any better than Feynman's book. honestly. Now, it's a little easier to learn. The guy makes jokes every 20 minutes, or at least tries to, and he does more demos and things. So learning is a weird social phenomena. And so, our foundation, our big problem is that the group that does the worst with online learning are low-income students, because their notion of why am I learning, their sense of self-confidence, the ability to figure out, I just got stuck because, 2 minuses cancel out, and I never saw that notation before. They just hit dead ends all the time, that if you're sitting in your dorm at Stanford, somebody walks down and helps you get through it. And so we have not solved the problem of how we get a low-cost education for low-income students where you actually complete. Most community colleges have a greater than 50% dropout rate. Most four-year colleges have a greater than 30% dropout rate. Now, Stanford doesn't have a dropout rate. Why? Because they don't let people in who would drop out. They succeeded the day the admissions department was done. They didn't make those people hardworking. They just picked hardworking people, which it's fine. I have no disagreement with it, but it means this notion of dropping out, it's, most people in this room don't know much about it, about how that comes up and gets discouraging. And so we have to solve not just the cost thing through digitization, but also the framework of motivation, so that a low-income person has as much chance of graduating as a elite person. And we're further away from that today than we've ever been.
Nick?
Great. Hi, Nick Maida, CEO of Gainsight. Bill, throughout the talk you talked about AI encapsulating human reasoning and kind of what it can do around that. What's the algorithm or heuristic you use personally to think about which cause is most worthy? So not which solution is most effective, but which cause to work on, whether it's poverty or disease or anything else?
Yeah, so there are people like Dustin Moskovitz who really went down this path of trying to do it, and it's brilliant and it's worthwhile, and he can share how he went down that path. He actually picked global health as one of the things. Also, avoiding AI taking over the world is another one that he
You're like, I could have told
he
you that.
picked. But most people pick their philanthropy because of more of an emotional story type thing. My daughter had anorexia. It turns out, I know a philanthropist whose daughter had anorexia, and he's funded the most amazing research. They're making really great advances. That's phenomenal. There was a philanthropist who had a son with autism. He has funded all the really great genetic understanding. Actually, they solved schizophrenia genetics because that turned out to be way easier. Autism genetics is very complicated, but they are finally getting to the bottom of that. So most people pick things for more emotional reasons. Now, once you get into that domain, then you can be a madman about, hey, why does my school drop out kids? Why are parentless black males having so much harder time in this school than others? What particular things could we do for them? So you can bring your business sense once you've picked your topics. There's so many topics. If you want to save lives with least money, then come to Seattle and let's work together on that. That's probably rises up. But I didn't pick it because of that. I picked it because of the injustice of letting a kid die. There were literally 2 vaccines that were invented for diarrhea and pneumonia that were being given in middle income and rich countries where less than 5% of the deaths from those diseases existed. And the kids who had 95% of the deaths weren't getting the vaccines. That was the paradigmatic thing that made me realize, okay, even though it's similar to what Rockefeller Foundation did, and I didn't want to do the same thing they did, to some degree we're doing the same thing they did.
We're getting like a good musical undertone here. This is really, so I apologize. We don't have any more time for questions right now, but I get to ask you the last question, which is a tradition here at Village Global. I'm sorry. No founder can change the world alone. It requires a village around you to help you realize your full potential. Who's someone in your village who has been instrumental to your success, and how so?
Well, there's no doubt that creating a board, having people like Dave Marquardt there who wasn't at the company, and we were so overwrought about, this is right, this is wrong, we messed this up, that having people have a little bit of distance come in and talk to us is good. For the last 30 years or so, I've gotten to be friends with Warren Buffett, and he's in Omaha. He's not in this tech world at all, and to him it's like, hey, how could you ever know which will rise and which will fall? I'm not going to put money until Apple sold at a multiple of 12. Then he decided he could put $50 billion into that. After he asked all his friends, hey, if somebody had an iPhone that was half as expensive, would you switch away? Or is it more like jewelry where you really want to have an iPhone? And so he decided that those profit streams might not be eliminated anytime soon. Anyway, because he's not in this world, he has a definite way of looking at things, including this idea of how work should be fun. He has made his work so much fun that he works more hours than I do. He works 6 days a week at 88 years old. And he likes to say that he skips to work every day. He doesn't, but he says that.
It's a good visual.
When he was 83, he could still skip, but now he's gotten really, he can't do it. Having somebody like that, the toughest thing I went through was this antitrust lawsuit where, it didn't seem very predictable, and he was a great counsel during all of that stuff. So getting somebody who's successful in another domain, but yet kind of a business type mindset. Anyway, for me, that was a huge gift.
Bill, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here with you. And thank you to Village Global for giving everybody the opportunity to spend the morning with Bill Gates.
Thank you. Good job. Right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Julia and Bill. What a stimulating conversation, covered so much territory. We now have some time for reception outside, so it's a beautiful day. Those of you who've been to our events before know that we have some question cards at different tables around some of the topics near and dear to Bill and Julia's conversation: giving back, the Gates Foundation, the future of Microsoft, healthcare. So if you're intrigued to have a conversation around those topics, you can stand around those tables, grab a question card, otherwise hang out, grab some food. There are some extraordinary people here to meet. You can also check out the science exhibits here free of charge because of your being our guest at the Exploratorium. So on behalf of all of us at Village Global, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. We're going to go ahead and get started right on time. My name is Ben Kesnoke. I'm a partner here at Village Global, and on behalf of my partners, Ross Fubini, Ann Duane, and Eric Tornberg, welcome to another edition of Lessons from Luminaries, brought to you by Village Global. We're thrilled to host you here at this world-famous science museum, the Exploratorium, on this stunningly gorgeous San Francisco day. Village Global, as many of you know, is an early-stage venture capital firm backed by some of the world's most successful entrepreneurs like Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Sarah Blakely, and indeed Bill Gates. And I think Bill Gates being with us here this morning is a testament to just how passionate these luminaries are about supporting the next generation of innovators, many of whom, of course, are in this room. We have about 80 to 100 world-class founders here with us this morning, and I want to give a special shout-out to the founders in our Network Catalyst program. Next week, we'll be announcing some special news regarding a new vintage of Network Catalyst, so stay tuned for that. For this morning's event, of course, we have our LP, Bill Gates, in conversation with another extraordinary entrepreneur and friend of Village Global, Julia Hartz. Julia is co-founder and CEO of Eventbrite and recently took the company public on the New York Stock Exchange. But 3/4 of the way through the conversation, they'll stop the conversation, and folks can line up at these two stationary mics to ask questions. Please keep your question very brief. And feel free to tweet anything from the conversation. You can tag us at Village Global. At the conclusion of their conversation, I'll be back with a short announcement, and then we'll break to the beautiful area outside for a reception. Without further ado, please welcome Julia Hartz and Bill Gates.
Thank you all for coming, and this is a pretty epic location.
Yeah, it's
you
beautiful.
have the better view.
Yeah, the bridge looks good.
Well, thank you, Bill, for taking the time this morning. Leading up to this great opportunity and honor to interview Bill, my team and I have spent a couple of weeks just going deep, and it's been just fascinating. It's actually been really helpful for my team as we've been thinking about 2019 planning, which I'm sure you don't miss much, but probably still do to some extent. And we have been thinking about themes around creating long-term value and really about the importance of sustainable business and philanthropy. And so today we're going to take a little bit of a journey through the different parts of how you've made this world a better place. And I wanted to start with really acknowledging the entrepreneurs and founders in this room and how much collective blood, sweat, and tears we've given to our companies. As the founder and operating CEO for 25 years of one of the most prolific and valuable startups, I wanted to start with your perspective on the important choices that you made during your tenure at Microsoft and how you view those choices as they've related to the long-term growth story of the company.
Well, Microsoft was very lucky in that we're not a capital-intensive business. So it was financed by money I'd made in high school. And I did the school scheduling, and there was all sorts of software things you could do and make money fairly easily in those days, because the number of people who knew how to do software things was very small. We did take an investment. We sold 5% of the company at a valuation of $20 million, took in $1 million from a venture firm, Dave Marquardt's venture firm, just because we wanted to have him, actually it was more the senior people, but it ended up being him, advise us about various choices we had to make. And so those early days, because we knew that software was this magical thing, and it was enabled because the chip was magical, and weirdly, people didn't understand that Moore's law essentially said that computing power would be infinite. And so the best way to think about it was to say, okay, software would be the limiting factor towards any sort of digitally assisted activity. And we thought of ourselves as a software company. We ended up competing with companies that were single product companies. So I wonder if anybody here has ever heard of Ashton Tate, or has anybody ever heard of Ashton Tate? Okay, good. There was a great article where I gave a hardcore speech about our database, and it said, Gates says Ashton Tate never existed, but I didn't actually say that. I just said that they might cease to exist at some point. Anyway, very competitive. There was a spreadsheet called 123, a word processor called WordPerfect. So these were single product companies. And in terms of really building your engineering tools, your international distribution, sales, consulting, how you work with corporate Salesforce, if you thought of yourself as a software company and a platform company, it was very different than saying, okay, I have 123, which was a Lotus spreadsheet product. So we didn't fail for ambition, but then the intensity of executing on it was super, super hard.
When you think about the people who helped you, really get Microsoft into a scaling zone beyond your founding team, can you reflect on one of the most important hires you made that maybe we don't know about but would give us insight into the early days?
Yeah, so the one you probably do know about is Steve Ballmer. Steve was with me at Harvard. He went off and worked for, he actually graduated, went to Procter & Gamble, and then he was going to Stanford Business School. And I had so overcommitted the firm because I was always worried we wouldn't, we had lots of customers go bankrupt. And I was hiring people who had children, you know, they were moving to the city. And so I'd always do this calculation of, okay, do I have enough money that if nobody pays me, can I pay the employees for over a year? And so I realized I needed somebody who could hire people and maybe even tell me not to sell things that weren't done yet. So I convinced Steve to drop out of business school. He came on and he was extremely good at hiring people. Then we realized we needed somebody who'd been in a large corporation. We made a mistake. We hired somebody from Tektronix who, when we interviewed him, we were so embarrassed that why would he want to come to our crummy little company? We forgot to interview him. But then after 6 weeks when he hadn't plugged his computer in, we actually decided that he wasn't the right person. But there was a person who worked at Radio Shack, a guy named John Shirley, that I wanted to hire. And I couldn't even say it because I really respected John. He was a huge customer at that point. And so I had the guy, the venture capitalist Dave Marquardt, is on the board, go say to John that I wanted to hire him. And John was like, well, of course, God, I'd love to come there. So I guess I underestimated our attractiveness at that point. But he came in, and he was the adult who, you know, had done financial planning. Like we made this mouse peripheral, and we had a warehouse full of them because we'd made too many. I mean, just such stupid things. And John just completely got that stuff under control. He was president for 9 years.
Wow.
And then he was an adult who knew how to hire adults. So we ended up with a nice mix of young, naive, over-optimistic people who still we controlled everything. And then the adults who could ask us to think twice before we, you know, did 3 crazy things per day. So it was a really great blend of skills. And we learned how to accept the fact that they weren't quite as intense as we were. I mean, they had like wives and kids and things. So they would leave at some point during the day.
Or night. That leads me to a question that I had for you about the early days and your work ethic. You've been, you know, quoted as saying you know, and probably something that we can all relate to. In your 20s and 30s, you were in the go-go years of Microsoft. You didn't take vacations. You basically all you did was work. When you look at in hindsight those years and what those yielded, and you look at founders today, would you give that same advice? How would you approach even the concept of work-life balance, or do you think that's not possible for early stage founders?
Well, I think, you know, you can worship and mythologize the idea of working extremely hard. For my particular makeup, I mean, it really is true that I didn't believe in weekends. I didn't believe in vacations. I mean, you know, I knew everybody's license plate, so I could tell you over the last month when their car had come and gone from the parking lot. So I don't recommend it. I don't think most people would enjoy it. Once I got into my 30s, I could hardly even imagine how I had done that, because by then some natural behavior kicked in, and I loved weekends, and you know, my girlfriend liked vacations, and that turned out to be kind of a neat thing. Now I take lots of vacations. I mean, my 20-year-old self is so disgusted with my current self. You know, I was sure I would never do anything but ride and coach. You know, now I have a plane. So it's very much counter-revelations have taken place at high speed. But yes, it is nice if during those first several years, if you have a team that's chosen to be pretty maniacal about the company. And how far that goes, you know, should have a mutual understanding, so you're not one person expecting one thing, another person expecting another thing. And you'll have individuals who have health or relatives or things that are distracted. But yes, I have a fairly hardcore view that there should be a very large sacrifice made during those early years, particularly if you're trying to do some engineering things that you have to get the feasibility. And in the software world, it's very, particularly for platforms, these are winner-take-all markets. So the greatest mistake ever is whatever mismanagement I engaged in that caused Microsoft not to be what Android is. That is, Android is the standard phone platform, non-Apple phone platform. That was a natural thing for Microsoft to win. And it really is winner take all. If you're there with half as many apps or 90% as many apps, you're on your way to complete doom. There's room for exactly one non-Apple operating system, and that, what's that worth? 400 billion that would be, transferred from company G to company M. And it's amazing to me, having made, one of the greatest mistakes of all time, and there was this antitrust lawsuit and various things, that, our other assets, Windows, Office, are still very strong. So we are a leading company. If we'd gotten that one right, we would be the leading company. But oh well.
The difference between A and D.
So this idea that just small differences can magnify themselves, that doesn't exist for a lot of businesses. If you're a service business, it doesn't exist. But for software platforms, it's absolutely gigantic. And so that's partly where you have the mentality of every night you think, am I screwing this up? And eventually, we did screw a super important one up.
When you think about, you've been, I guess, I would bet on you to find the key to reversing aging. It's a personal opinion. When you do find that, and you could go back to your 20s, what would you start?
Well, AI, the paradigmatic question for anybody who's ever written a piece of software is, what is the software that's controlling a human? Its ability to write symphonies, play chess, engage in social activity, read. Computers, we picked that AI, we would define AI by certain sensory perception thing, primarily speech understanding and vision, and that those would be the frontier. Also chess playing, but that turned out to be really solvable, that is, to be better than humans by brute force techniques. So that kind of got taken off about 15 years ago. But you're always wondering, when can I create a computer that could take, say, a textbook, read it, take the AP exam, and get a 5? And that's completely unsolved. So the most interesting, this guy Hilbert laid out 22 problems for mathematicians in 1900. If you think of the equivalent in software, problem number 1, that sort of subsumes most of the other problems, although there are things about simulating the environment that are also interesting. But anyway, problem number 1 is not solved. And so that's what you would work on. If your mind, from age, say, 11, is thinking about software and what can it do, what can it not do, and then you think you're really good at writing code, and then you meet somebody who's better, and you think, okay, now I'm really good, then you meet somebody who's better. By age 18, actually, you might be pretty good. So the rest of your life, you're going to think about the structure of the software that can do the equivalent of what a human can do. So I would definitely be drawn to that. Now, it turns out at this era, that's not the only interesting problem. I mean, there's certain problems in biology. Diseases of the poor are one that I'm obsessed with. Yeah. I'm not doing the test tubes myself, but I get to help pick and fund the people working on those things. And there's also things in energy that have to do with inventions that would avoid climate change. So, I would definitely do software because that's what my brain, it's like Bobby Fischer playing chess. I mean, your mind gets molded and shaped in a pretty permanent way to the obsessive problems of age 11 to 21.
When you think about the last few decades and your being such an iconic entrepreneur and founder for obviously this room and many others, but also in seeing how entrepreneurship has changed and shifted over the last few decades, and then being in present day where you are spending more time with the next generation of founders on many different subjects. One of them is philanthropy. What have you observed that has changed over the last few decades in terms of entrepreneurship, and what are you learning from founders of the next generation?
Well, I'm sure it's nice that the idea of being a founder is a thing. That is, that you can meet other people doing it, and the notion that if your first one isn't perfect, that it's okay to do a second one. And there's all these people who want to hand you money now. It's got a real ecosystem. Now, to go with that nice feature, it also means that the ease of entry, and therefore, unless you've come up with something really outthought everyone, there are a dozen other people who say, okay, let's design drugs with machine learning.
Right.
Let's do radiology with machine learning. So you get to move fast, you get to see the patterns, you don't have to invent a lot of things, even a lot of things you don't even have to do inside the company anymore.
Yeah.
Like cloud computing simplifies the ability to scale at a moment's notice. But you do get intense competition, including from the existing giants that are kind of scanning the world with close to infinite R&D resources. So, I think there's a lot more thinking that goes into about, okay, what do I want my company to be like? There's, you can look at Netflix and say, do I want to do, because he's a very innovative thinker about doing things slightly differently than what other people have done. And, Reid Hoffman writes books that are fantastic. So it's a more understood field, whereas then the idea of, okay, you're 19 years old, they won't let you rent a car, you have a company. It was so bizarre that actually people would overreact, and once they realized that such a thing existed, they would expect you to understand and know things that you had no clue about it, because it was almost like a wild card that you can write software better than my entire software engineering team can. So I think it's great that it's well established, and some of these practices about treating your workers well, thinking about diversity. I mean, these are also require energy to do these things, but the field is so much better about making these companies good. And the companies themselves, of course, the private sector and the innovation in the private sector is the primary reason why things are improving. Philanthropy has this very specialized role to play. So the companies themselves, the likelihood you'll do more good through your philanthropy than through the company you do, that there can be cases like that, but particularly if you're thoughtful about it, the work you do in your company does have huge benefits to the world.
Well, that leads me to a question that I think many founders these days are pondering.